Good afternoon. I'm going to call this budget work session to order of May 18, 2015. Would you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Call the roll, please.
Councilmember Francisco, Hart, Hotchkiss, Murillo. Here. Rouse, White, Mayor Schneider.
Here. Okay, so this is the Public Works session, and we have opportunities for people to speak about Public Works, and I believe, Howard Green, are you here on something other than Public Works, or is it public budget in general? We'll let you do budget in general right now, if you'd like. You've got 2 minutes.
I got the CD from the Treasurer's Office and found it both comprehensive and size of the binder there very complete. I had some problem digging down, and that's why I'm appearing in the general section, although I had a chance to speak to Mr. Kelly about the Public Works questions I had.
You can come back for that if you want. So.
Well, it was wanting to be able to drill down on what's in plan. The capital improvements budget in all of the various departments is a high-level kind of perspective of what's coming up. And I couldn't find in the budget materials, and I don't know whether it belongs there or if it's somewhere else that could be referenced in the budget materials, where the backup or the more detailed material is for each of the departments. And I was just going to suggest that as maybe a thought for the future.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. All right. With that, we will move it to Ms. Bjork.
It escaped. Sorry.
Well, the CCA.
That's there, and then one extra.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, members of council. Sorry, I can't see left-handed there. I'm Rebecca Bjork. I'm here with my department management team to present the Public Works budget for fiscal year 16. Our budget presentation has been running about an hour and a half, and we have left time for questions at the end of each section's presentation. And of course, if you have questions during the presentation, you're welcome to ask those at that time as well. I did want to say, however, that we have got a number of people here with comments on specific division budgets, and it's my suggestion that we hear public comment on each division as we get through that budget, and we have asked the commenters to indicate on their slips which portion of the budget they're interested in. So the mission of the Public Works Department is to provide our community with a sustainable foundation to thrive by delivering quality services and public infrastructure through efficient and fiscally responsible practices. In order to organize ourselves to effectively do that, we are organized into 6 divisions: administration, engineering, facilities, fleet, transportation, and water resources. And each of the division managers will be presenting their portion of the budget today. The Public Works Department is comprised of 294.2 full-time equivalents, of whom 15 are managers, 32 are supervisors, and 247.2 are general employees. I do want to say that we are requesting 2 additional positions, both in water resources this year, one of which is a management position, and Joshua Hagmark will be speaking about in his presentation. The 0.25 increase isn't actually an addition of a person. It's the reallocation of a person from parks to our facilities department, and the cost for that person will still be captured by charges allocated costs against parks. And Jim will speak a little bit more about that in his presentation. We do have 29 performance-based budget programs, or per P3s. This is the program by which we look at the details of what we do and track our efficiency and progress in meeting goals and objectives. Our projected revenue for fiscal year 16 is almost $182 million. I do want to say that that is a little bit skewed by the inclusion of 2 large, well, it's quite substantially skewed by the inclusion of 2 large loans that we project getting within fiscal year 16. the loan for the desal plant and a large loan for the wastewater plant to fund the aeration basin project. So without those two loans, our revenue would be about $108 million. Our projected expenditures are $190 million. The difference between the projected revenue and the projected expenditures is made up through a planned use of reserves, most substantially of which in the water program to help with some of the drought costs, and those are reserves above policy. However, we also are using reserves in a number of the other programs, including, for instance, fleet management, where we manage that budget for fleet replacement by putting money to reserves so that when we have to purchase cars or other vehicles, there is money and revenue available to make those purchases. So that's planned use of reserves. And then other smaller uses of reserves in a number of the programs, but including about $700,000 combined in our streets program to help provide funding to streets capital, both through streets reserves and through Measure A reserves. We don't try and carry a large reserve balance there. We'd like to keep it going into capital, so we have programmed that for use. The general Public Works General Fund portions of our activities are administration, engineering, and environmental compliance. And I'm going to talk very briefly about those. These are the functions that receive direct funding from the general fund. However, our two biggest functions in this area, engineering and land development, both have substantial revenues that they then generate to offset those general fund transfers in, and that those are returned back to repay the general fund for that money. So engineering through the charging for working on the capital improvement program, charging to the capital projects themselves, and land development from fees that they receive for land development activities. The general fund expenditures are fairly standard. Allocated costs have gone up partly because of the change of an allocation to now run our annex yard through facilities, and then we capture the costs of that activity through allocated costs, but also because allocated costs across the board have gone up substantially for us. The salary change that you see there does reflect a request to move one person who was most recently funded in the Streets Fund, a transportation planner who works on land development issues, back into the general fund. Historically, we had 2.5 people funded by the general fund who supported transportation planning in the land development review process. During the budget problems of the past few years, we did move those positions into the Streets Fund portion of the budget, so that because the revenues for general fund, as you know, were so reduced. At this point in time, however, given the condition of our streets and roads, we are asking to send that one position back over to the general fund. So the administration division is managed by Michelle DeCant, and she's the only of our division managers not speaking today. I'm speaking on her behalf. But Michelle and her team provide division management support, manage all our capital improvement program work. They do all of our council reports, coordinate all council reports, provide support to other city departments, monitor and coordinate the department's budget, which is a very substantial undertaking with a budget of this size. And then manage all the P3 program information and data, and as well as coordinating all of the training for the department's administrative staff. So with that, if there are any questions about the administration portion or the general portion of the budget, I'm happy to answer that. Otherwise, I will pass it on to Jim Dewey, our facilities manager.
Great. Any questions? Nope. Okay, Mr. Dewey. And after Mr. Dewey's presentation, we'll then have the presentation on community choice energy.
So good afternoon, Madam Mayor, council members. I will be presenting the overview of the fiscal year 16 budget for the facilities division. First of all, facilities has 6 programs: building maintenance, energy conservation, environmental compliance, communications, custodial services, and facilities capital. We have 37 full-time employees, and we provide diverse services such as maintenance and operation of city buildings, operation of radio and phone systems, management of the citywide energy conservation program, and hazardous materials cleanups and vector control in the public right-of-way. So looking at our revenues for this year, there's a few items that I want to bring your attention to. The first one is the funding for building maintenance. Building maintenance is really our operations program. And you can see we have a large increase in fiscal year 16. And this is related to the bottom item, the capital program. And we've reorganized our budget such that funds will come into our operating budget, and then everything net of operations will go directly to our capital program. And this is consistent with a lot of our other programs in public works. This is normally the way that the capital program has been funded. So it's just an easier accounting mechanism for us to manage the capital program. Now, if you look at the capital program line, there's an amount from fiscal year 15, $2.2 million. It drops down to $275,000. That $275,000 is an infusion of funds from the general fund to help support our infrastructure improvement, our capital improvement to our buildings. So we're getting a little bit more money towards doing more capital renewal work, which is very much needed. Under custodial services, we have a 15% increase coming up in the next year. That mostly has to do with an increase in contract custodial services. And in the energy conservation, there's a large increase there. What that is that's $600,000 that pays for the electricity for the service of street lights and traffic signals. And normally those funds come from the streets division. This year we're going to allocate that directly to the energy conservation program, and then we're going to pay all those bills directly from our budget. This pie chart shows our appropriations by program, and as you can see, building maintenance is the largest portion of that. We are an intra-city services fund, so our funds come through allocation to other city departments. The only exception here is that piece of the pie under environmental compliance. So environmental compliance is part of the facilities division, but it's funded directly by the general fund. Looking at our expenditures, a few items of note: the salary or the supplies and services line item sees an increase. That's directly related to what I just talked about the funds coming in for electricity, for street lights and traffic signals into our energy conservation program. Our allocated costs have come up a little bit, and that's mostly due to our increase in our overhead allocation from the city. Special projects has a couple of things that have been added that increase costs for routine maintenance provided by our building maintenance section. And I think that's, under capital, you can see that there's quite a bit of a decrease from FY15 to 16. And we took money out of reserves last year to help fund a $2 million project at the police station for the replacement of the air conditioning system. And that project is going very well right now. But we're also, we've kind of re-engineered how we're going to handle our capital budget. We used to include all of the labor from the building maintenance operations into that capital budget. We've removed that this year. So the only thing that you'll see, all the money that's allocated to capital in our budget is directly for contracts and for materials that are applied directly towards capital improvement.
I got a quick question. Are all these changes the sort of shuffling things around? Is it just to make life easier for you all? Because I don't see any particular strategy difference here or anything.
Yeah, Madam Mayor and Councilmember Hotchkiss, it is makes things a little bit easier for us. But what it does, there was a lot of, when you transfer funds from one program, we had really two programs that we were dealing with.
Right.
When we were transferring funds from one program to another, there was a certain amount of double counting that was going on that was difficult to manage from an accounting perspective.
So this has cleaned that up?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. On the special projects, can you give me a typical example of a special project there?
Councilmember White, in this case, the addition is for the routine maintenance. So, like air conditioning contracts for the monthly maintenance for air conditioning systems, and backflow preventers, things like that. Something that happens on a routine basis. That's what the increase is for.
And my question was, what would be a typical expense out of that fund? I mean, I'm hearing that's the new. All right, what's just has been happening and is the generic cost there?
Typically under special projects, it is usually routine things. It isn't necessarily special, but that's where most of the cost for that line item comes from. So it isn't necessarily a special project in terms of a capital renewal project. And most of the special project, that special project line item is in part of our operations fund. So it usually is related to some routine or a number of routine maintenance items. So speaking to the Facilities Capital Program, the Facilities Capital Program provides for the funding of capital maintenance projects for general fund facilities. The program identifies large projects planned for the year and identifies their costs and provides a long-term plan for coordination with other departments' capital improvement plans. Here's some of the projects, the larger projects that we have slated for fiscal year 16. The West Side Center has a north wing, and we've had a number of water intrusion problems, and that's mostly because the roof is old and needs to be replaced, and there's a lot of old air conditioning systems that are up there too that have exposed ductwork, and whenever it rains, water goes right down through the ductwork into the roof, and it's been causing a lot of problems with the structure of the building, as you can see from the pictures. So this year we've had to, affect some emergency repairs there in order to handle that. And so this has really been pushed up to a priority project. So we'll be replacing all of the roofing for the north wing of the West Side Community Center, as well as the air conditioning systems, which need to be replaced anyway. This is another project that's very similar. This is another water intrusion problem. This is the water distribution building in the Public Works corporate yard. And we discovered that the north wall of that building was almost completely deteriorated from water intrusion. It wasn't completely obvious to us because there was nothing indicating that from the outside or from the inside. We found it by accident. And but we had to rebuild that whole wall, and then with that, we are going to be replacing, what is the real problem is an old roof. So we'll be doing that in fiscal year 16. And another project that we are excited about, we're currently in design for the repainting of the Central Library. And so we've asked an architect and a designer to come up with 3 different designs that we can go before our different planning boards and commissions to come up with a paint scheme that will really bring out all of the great architectural elements of that building. As you know, that building is really 3 different buildings built in 3 different times, but there's a lot of really nice architectural features that can be brought out with a good coordinated paint job. And then in fiscal year 16, that design will be done, and we'll be painting the library as well as completing a lot of external repairs to the library.
Are you going to be painting inside and out in the library?
Councilmember Hotchkiss, no, that this project is just an external project.
Because, in the roof of the library, particularly in the sort of main reading room, there's some egregious watermarks. Do we have any prospect of getting that fixed?
We do, and we know that it's there. The difficulty right now is just getting a high lift up into that area so that we can address it. But most of that stuff should be addressed next fiscal year. So our city has many wonderful and heavily used facilities, and the community has supported the building of these facilities in the past and continues to enjoy their benefit. But with each facility, there's a need for renewal, and there's really no endowment for this when a building is built. So the city's invested in the renewal of the Carrillo Recreation Center and the Fire Station 1 using redevelopment agency funds. And currently, we're in design for the renovation of one of our most prized assets, which is the Cabrillo Pavilion and Arts Center on East Beach. We should be beginning construction on that for its renewal around October 2016. So speaking to our capital program in terms of infrastructure needs, we currently estimate that we have a backlog of about $218 million in capital maintenance or deferred maintenance in our city facilities. So a typical commercial building usually needs major renewal every 50 years. And when a renewal occurs, upgrades for code improvements also happen. So it triggers things like ADA accessibility, new fire code requirements, and structural upgrades, so that it accumulates even more into that backlog. Currently, our capital maintenance is not fully funded on an annual basis either. We need about $1.2 million in order to just stay even with the maintenance backlog that we have. So our deferred maintenance is currently growing.
Where are we with that annual funding at this point?
We need about one. You mean as far as how much are we funded right now? If you look at the complete effect of our budget, we're right about around 1.2 million. We need about another 1.2 million.
Okay, so 2.4.
Yes.
And we're okay.
Okay, now we're going to switch to another subject about community choice aggregation. First of all, I just want to stop and maybe if there's any questions about the facilities budget at this point.
Well, thank you, Madam Mayor. As I'm sort of following up on the question I just asked, is that this obviously has been an ongoing conversation, that term, capital building maintenance. It's kind of an interesting.
Capital renewal.
Whatever we're calling it, but at 2.4. Can you go back a few years? I mean, that's just one of those places where at least I know we've been trying to increase that number each year. Can you go back 2, 3 years and say, okay, where were we and then you say we're at 1.2 now. Where were we 2 years ago or 3 years ago, shall we say?
Well, I can't speak to those numbers exactly, but I could speak generally about them, is that we have been continuously getting more funding for capital renewal through various means. Sometimes it's just a one-shot through the general fund. Sometimes it's just been an increase. Our overall operating budget has increased over time. And so, we have gotten substantially more money and more directed towards that fund. So we're moving in the right direction. It's just there still is a kind of a structural deficit in our program and hopefully there'll be some answer to that.
Like $2.4 million.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. Rouse?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So, Mr. Dewey, you're talking about an annual infusion, correct? And is there as we've had this conversation on a bigger scale, we've talked about trying to catch up with the declining maintenance of certain things like pavement structures and that type of thing. Is there a catch-up point? Is there a point, we're talking about structures and facilities, buildings largely. Is there a point, is there an end game? Obviously buildings will still age as we get going, but as we talk about something like street pavement where, it's constantly in use and, obviously the repairs that you make on a building are going to have some type of functional life. So we will repair it and put it away for 20 years or whatever it is. Is there some kind of a formula that we can look at to determine what the end game is or where we're going to go with this?
Councilmember Rouse, I have several graphs that show different levels of funding and how that affects our deferred maintenance backlog. Once our operations maintenance, our regular maintenance is completely covered. If we get a little bit more funding over that, over time we're going to be able to pay down, we'll be able to take care of the deferred maintenance backlog, and it really is dependent on how much money comes in on an annual basis into our budget. So I do have some things I can show you on that. I don't have anything right here for that. But another thing to also remember is that all of these systems, these are all based on formulas of standard life for different building components. And you can see what happens when a roof goes bad, for instance. Roofs, of course, are priority one because you have a bad roof, everything else underneath it goes. But the thing that is nice about, building deferred maintenance is that if a lot of systems are way past their useful life, the building can still remain operating. And we do. It just, there's certain things, it becomes a priority game at that point. But there is a point where you reach a critical mass and where you're having problems all the time. It basically, those costs kind of shift into your operating budget because you're always having to address emergency calls and emergency repairs, and that's what you see as the deferred maintenance backlog grows.
Mr. Hart?
And then just to kind of continue that point, so what we're looking at when you talk about this $1.2 million deficit on an annual basis, that's just to stay even with the expected level of maintenance, not to address the backlog at all. So you need an additional $1.2 million to have the problem not get worse on an annual basis.
Councilmember Hart, yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Mr. White, did you have something?
Thank you. Yeah, I did. Thank you. And so you used a number, and I'm for one, I'm struggling with working with this set of sheets because the numbers are very small for these old eyes. So just FYI, you used a number of 200 or 250 million unfunded liability, or whatever term you used. How does that relate to? We've been talking a number of 450 million as sort of our overall city unfunded liability as we've been talking about the infrastructure stuff. Is this, how does this fit into that $450 million number, except that it's around half of it? Does it include the streets and everything, or are we looking at somehow, are we finding a different set of numbers that we're working with here a little bit?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember White, the 400 million that we're talking about, an overall backlog over the next 20 years is a fairly general number. And as Mr. Dewey said, it's an estimate. So it is inclusive of general need within the community for all of our infrastructure assets.
For the buildings. And then the
maintenance.
streets are outside of that. That's kind of the other big piece.
The streets are a part of that 400 million backlog.
Right, the 400, right?
Right, but not the backlog that Mr. Dewey is speaking to, correct?
And that might be even the other biggest piece of that total unfunded liability. Thank you.
The police headquarters is not in your 250 million, or it's not. So there's another big chunk that's in part of the 400. Okay. So just trying to get all our numbers straight. Okay. So I think go on with CCA, and then we'll have the presentation from the community.
Okay, moving on to community choice aggregation. This is just a little bit of a background. I know that we came to council in 2007 and talked about this before, and there's been a lot of interest generated throughout the community on community choice. Community choice aggregation was enacted in 2002 to allow municipalities a choice in the electrical energy provider after this California energy crisis caused the end of electrical deregulation in California. So during deregulation, of course, anyone can select a energy provider, and then they can, find out whether or not, they can custom tailor or buy green energy in whatever portion that they really wanted, depending on what products were available from that particular entity. Of course, that's not available anymore. All of our energy comes from Southern California Edison now. So far, there are 2 communities participating, Marin and Sonoma, and there's a new CCA rolling out in Lancaster presently. CCA provides a choice in the sources of electrical generation. So for us, Southern California Edison will still provide the billing, meter reading, delivery of the power, but those participating will have a choice of options provided by the CCA or can opt out and stay with Southern California Edison. So community choice aggregation is really about choice of where your energy is sourced from. So what we're talking about here as far as electricity is kilowatt hours. So, you can have a decision of where your energy comes from, whether it comes from hydropower, renewable power, natural gas, turbine generation. You would go to an aggregator and they would put together a program where you can decide how much renewable energy or whatever your power mix needs to look like. And Southern California Edison will still transport that power over their power lines, maintain those, and will read your meter and send out bills too. CCA allows the community to develop their own feed-in tariffs for locally produced renewable energy and allows the development of custom energy incentive programs. It can allow for a greener energy portfolio and help reduce indirect CO2 emissions for the community. And so going forward, this is really kind of rehashing what we've talked about before council. The first step is to complete a feasibility plan and to find out if CCA is a viable option for our community. And so we estimated that at about $100,000. The cost can be split among interested cities and counties in our area, whoever wants to participate. Santa Barbara County recently expressed interest at the Board of Supervisors meeting that they would like to take a lead on that, and they're looking for partners with this. And I really recommend that we allow them to take that lead, and that we express our interest in this, and that we can split these costs for the feasibility study among partners who are really interested. And the next step from there would be, which would cost more money, of course, would be putting together an implementation plan that will be filed with the CPUC for approval, and then City Council would need to pass an ordinance in order to participate in this, and eventually join up under a JPA, and then roll out this program to the community if all the other steps are completed. And questions?
Great. Just before we get to questions up here, so there was a request from the community to give a presentation on this, and we thought this was the most appropriate place to do it, the Public Works budget hearing, because I know there's a cost association to it that we can decide at that meeting in June, but to do the presentation today so we can let it sink in. So if you want to wait until then. Okay. So they have a bunch of people who've waived time to Jefferson. Linton, I want to make sure you're here so you can get your full amount. So I see Dave Davis right there. Eileen Daly, there you are. Cameron Gray, there you are. Carl Huttever, there you are. Kathy King, I see Kathy. Richard Yates, there you are. Rebecca Klassen, there you are. Liam Holsick, there you are, Liam. Axel Eaton, and Stephen Federley. All right. And then John Broberg, you want to speak separately, correct? Where's John? Yes, you're going to speak separately? At the end. Okay, so you'll speak after this. So you have up to 22 minutes. You don't need to necessarily take all the 22 minutes, but it's there for you if you need it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and fellow council members. Before I begin, I'd like to thank the mayor and Mr. Casey for allowing us this time to present about community choice energy. I'd also like to recognize some groups and individuals that ceded their time today, allowing me to speak, and are supporters of community choice energy. The World Business Academy, League of Women Voters, 350.org, the local chapter of the Sierra Club, CalPERG, and Richard Yates from the Opal Restaurant. So Mr. Dewey did a very good job of explaining community choice energy. And a little disclaimer right now, the community choice aggregation is undergoing a little bit of rebranding right now and looking to drop the aggregation. So I will refer to CCA as community choice energy, or simply community choice. But community choice is not revolutionary, nor does it require tremendous upheaval. It simply requires that a city or a county or a group of cities or counties decides that they want to take a choice in where their energy comes from. And they create a new nonprofit agency responsible for procuring that power for its local consumers. That simple change of allowing communities choice in where their energy comes from and where the revenue that energy generates is spent offers a host of benefits, which I'll talk about in a second. Before I go any further, I want to make a couple things expressly clear about community choice energy. CCE does not replace the local utility. It is, in fact, a partnership with the local utility, be it PG&E in northern Santa Barbara County or Southern California Edison here in Southern County. So Southern California Edison or PG&E would still be responsible for transmission, the maintenance of the lines, and billing would still occur through that existing utility. And any customer that does not want to participate in the Community Choice Program can simply opt out, and they would get the exact same service that they already had with the incumbent utility. So Community Choice creates the nonprofit agency that I mentioned before, which is set up as a nonprofit, so it's not required to pay ratepayer returns and has a lower access to capital. Now, these 2 points have allowed Community Choice Energy to actually win on price. Fortunately, here in California, we have proof of concept. We have proof that community choice delivers the 4 benefits that we have outlined here. First, that revenue stays local. Sonoma Clean Power calculated that each year, $180 million was leaving the county, going to pay top-heavy salaries at the local utility and ratepayer returns. Now, through Sonoma Clean Power, that money stays local and can be invested into local energy efficiency programs, local build-out of generation, leading to economic stimulus and job creation. Now, the next 3 bullet points I want to dig into a little bit more closely. As Mr. Dewey so eloquently put, Community Choice Energy offers energy consumers something that they've never had before, a choice in energy providers, and a choice in the type of energy that they receive. This is the sample offering for Marin Clean Energy. You can see that they have 3 offerings, each of which has a higher percentage of renewables and a lower GHGs associated than what's currently being offered by PG&E. And one would think that with more renewables, this energy would be more expensive. But in fact, what's happening in Marin is that Marin is winning on price. So what you see here is the light green offering in the annual savings across 3 different ratepayer classes. And you can see in all 3 of these ratepayer classes, they are seeing savings with Marin Clean Energy. Now, looking at residential ratepayers as an example, you would think that $17 a year is not a huge sum. But on aggregate, it is actually quite a big deal. On aggregate, across of all of Marin Clean Energy's customers, they're saving $6 million a year. That's $6 million that's staying in local residents' pockets that can be reinvested into the local economy. And you can see, looking at some of these other figures here, you're seeing large savings across commercial ratepayers and municipal ratepayers. Using San Rafael and Richmond as an example, these 2 municipalities are saving $77,000 and $107,000 a year on their energy costs. This is something that we in the city of Santa Barbara could look to save as well if we were able to launch our own community choice program. And these programs are also delivering GHG reductions. Since its inception, Marin Clean Energy has led to reductions of 57,219 metric tons of carbon dioxide. This is significant as we look back to our climate action plan, which in 2012 identified community choice as the single most impactful measure that the city could do to reduce our GHG emissions. Now, this becomes ever more critical as in a couple weeks, we look to consider to deactivate the desalination plant, significantly energy intensive and with significant GHG emissions associated with it. Community Choice Energy offers an elegant solution to help mitigate some of the energy costs from this facility and the GHG emissions associated with it. Community Choice Energy offers local control and local accountability. a community choice program would be governed by a board of local appointed elected officials that are already familiar with our community and familiar with the needs of our community. The program's mission and goal would originate with this board. But what gets me really excited about community choice is the opportunity to create incentives for things like energy efficiency or local generation. Through feed-in tariffs or net energy metering, you can guarantee a favorable price that the program would be willing to pay for local generation. So that what you can do is you could convert unused rooftops and parking lots into local generation sources, where these individual landowners are getting a return on that investment, and we are also bringing generation closer to where the load is, leading to a more resilient grid. Now, these are cities and counties that have at very least passed resolutions to explore a feasibility study for community choice energy. The success of Marin and Sonoma and now Lancaster has not gone unnoticed, and that's why this list is so long. And I say that now is the time to add Santa Barbara to this list. And how do we do that? The first step towards community choice is funding a feasibility study. Because quite frankly, there's more questions than answers around community choice. How many ratepayers do we need to have a viable program? What are the potential rates that we could offer our local energy consumers? What are the potential GHG reductions? And what is the job creation of a local community choice energy program? A technical feasibility study can provide those answers. So as we look to the community to draw more support, we can point back to these hard answers. We've been talking to a number of consultants about the price for a feasibility study, and you can see there is a little bit of a discrepancy in the price here between the figure that Mr. Dewey showed you a few minutes ago. This would be a comprehensive feasibility study across northern and southern Santa Barbara County, inclusive of 2 jurisdictions, PG and Southern California Edison, and including peer review. And this is a padded number. We think that it could be done for less than 200 to 225, but we wanted to be conservative. What we're asking from the city is that the city contribute $50,000 towards this feasibility study. This is not the first time we've talked about community choice energy here. As Mr. Dewey referred to, we talked about this back in 2007. But given the success of Marin and Sonoma, and now the fact that Lancaster has launched a community choice energy program in Edison territory, now is the time that we start talking about community choice again, and now is the time that we start taking action on community choice. And the way we do that is funding a feasibility study. And I want to add one last point here. The Community Environmental Council believes that community choice energy is the most important thing that our community can do towards reducing greenhouse gas emissions and addressing the global problem of climate change. In 2007, we identified community choice as the silver bullet combining local benefits and GHG reductions. Given how important we see community choice energy, on Thursday, our board president, Dave Davis, will be asking our board to take $50,000 out of our endowment and devote that to a feasibility study in 2015 and 2016. CEC believes so strongly in community choice that we are willing to stake our future on it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, now for questions, I guess since Jefferson's here, Mr. Rouse.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. You mentioned in the feasibility study and numbers 200, 250,000, yet you've got other communities that are online already doing this. Mm-hmm. How much of that information can be extrapolated into our situation?
That's something that we're actually doing right now. We're taking a look at all the feasibility studies and the bids that are out there to try to get a sense of what the total cost would be for startup. And that's actually where we came up with that 200 to 225.
Because it doesn't seem like we'd have to start from square one, given that we've got other people already up and rolling, right? And other like-sized communities. And
yeah, I completely agree. I mean, there's a number of consultants that have done these reports before, so it simply becomes a plug and play of putting our own data into the reports that they've already created. So it could potentially be cheaper than the figures we have up there.
And Mr. Dewey mentioned it as well about a tariff or potentially a local tariff.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is that in place of other utility tariffs or a tax, or is that in addition to? How does that work?
Yeah, so I think you're making slightly confusing two different things. The tariffs, as in the tariffs, the rate that we pay as ratepayers, mm-hmm. and a tariff in a feed-in tariff which is a rate that the Community Choice Program would pay to purchase electricity. So in a feed-in tariff, a Community Choice Program says that they're willing to buy solar power at a certain price. So an energy developer can say, I can get this price for my electricity, and I can put solar panels on this warehouse roof. Does that answer your question?
Well, no, it does. I just thought about it in terms of whenever we do something about rates or public funds, we have to talk about Prop 218 and noticing and that type of thing. So
right.
I wasn't sure if we were talking apples for apples. And the last thing I wanted to ask about, the thing that always sends chills down the spines of many citizens, is the formation of another agency.
Yes.
The new nonprofit.
Yes.
Tell me how that works and who those people are and what they do and how it's funded.
Yeah, so the nonprofit would be funded. You'd form a joint powers authority with representation from any jurisdiction that would want to be part of that community choice program. So using Marin as an example, they have representation from the county and every city that's part of the program that sits on the board. Okay. Now, in Marin and Sonoma, part of that funding came out of the county. You take loans as well to do that startup formation. But once the program is up and running, it is completely funded by ratepayers. Okay, there's no taxes that get allocated to it. And just to give you an idea, in Sonoma, at their launch, their balance sheet was negative $8 million. Within just 6 months of operating, based on the revenue from ratepayers, their balance sheet was positive $5.5 million. So all these startup costs that we're talking about here, $200,000, $225,000, all those startup costs get recouped once the program gets started. And it can be structured as a loan so that you could get a slight return on that.
And once again, that your ratepayer numbers were reflected some nominal savings, but savings nonetheless.
Yeah.
Include all of that.
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
Yep.
We'll make you chair. How's that? Really good. Good. Mr. Hart?
I think it's a question for Mr. Dewey. One of the issues that we've had in expanding solar in the city of Santa Barbara has been the metering problem, where at the airport we have lots of land, but we only can be compensated for the energy that we produce up to the amount that is used at the airport. We haven't been able to aggregate citywide energy use and have the benefits of solar in locations that are other than those direct meters. It sounds like this would address this issue directly and provide us a lot more flexibility in that regard. Is that true?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Hart, yes, community choice aggregation allows us to essentially wheel power from, I believe we can do it from one location within the city to another, but also to be able to participate in a feed-in tariff, which would be kind of a monetary representation of that. So yes, we could build out where there's room to build as long as there's sufficient electrical infrastructure to carry that power, and we can receive the benefit of it too.
And right now, we just don't have a choice. That's not even an option to us. We are stuck.
No, there is an option to do it. There is legislation available, but there's a lot of caveats to it. And being that you can generate power in one account that is a time of use account and deliver that to another account, but there's a thing, if you participated in the California Solar Initiative, you're excluded from that. There's a lot of funny rules about that have made it impossible for us to participate so far. And community choice would open that up for us.
Well, I think, I've paid a fair amount of attention to this and looked into this, and I think that Mr. Litton's presentation makes a really compelling case. And the circumstances that we have already struggled with in trying to expand the use of solar and alternative energy within the city, the fact that the customers can save money and have the flexibility, the ability to reinvest within the community to actually generate solar. I know that Marin is looking at that because they have a significant revenue stream now, and they're able to actually create projects and develop solar power projects that are competitively priced and that wouldn't be advanced otherwise with the private sector market because of the issues that we're talking about with these metering issues. So it seems that this is exactly the right time, as Mr. Litton said. The fact that we're building the desal plant, we're going to have a significant new greenhouse gas emission contribution in the community, gives me reason to think that this is really ripe. The fact that CEC is potentially putting in $50,000, the county's interested in doing it. I think we're in a position, I hope, to do that as well. And I personally think that we should be at the table talking about who should be in charge of this. I understand the county has generously offered to take the lead on that. I think that's one model. I also think the city could take the lead on that. I think that we could ask the county for the contribution rather than us being the one that's contributing to the county. There's obviously a lot of issues with doing that, but there certainly is an urgency about the fact that we're the ones who are building the desal plant and adding this significant additional increase in greenhouse gas emissions. One of the biggest issues for me for this subject is the fact that it's taken so long to get here. We were talking about this almost 10 years ago, and for a variety of legitimate reasons, it's taken a really long time to get here. And these are really complicated things to do when you combine multiple jurisdictions. I work in my day job in a place where at SPCAG, where I know how complicated that is. And I'm not casting aspersions in any way, but I'm saying that I have great confidence in our staff's ability to do things like this. And I think that the desalination plant is a great example of that. A little over a year ago, we didn't think we even had a permit to pull that off. And we've been able to do that and advance that by really having the organization focused on this mission. I think that sense of urgency directly related to the desal plant is what this project needs to advance it. And I worry that the complexity of having two different utility companies in this conversation with North Santa Barbara County and PG&E and Southern Santa Barbara County and Edison just adds another layer of complexity that despite everybody's interest in making this happen, could be an issue for this to founder on. So I think, if the council is interested, I think that we should inject ourselves in that conversation and have some real frank discussions with the county about who is the most appropriate agency to take this lead. The money's a loan from either jurisdiction. Ultimately, this thing needs just to be fledged to the point where it's ready to go on its own and it stands on its own 2 feet. And then whatever contributing agencies are adding to this initial startup costs will be recouped with interest, when this entity starts operations. And in the examples that you're using in California, where there are relatively few in California still, is really the exception. There are other states, for example, I understand Illinois, where there are lots of these, that they're almost rolling these things out on a monthly basis in the state of Illinois. So this is not as revolutionary as it is in California, as it is in the rest of the world and the rest of the country. And I think that, we, as an organization, as a city, have been environmental leaders in the past, and this is absolutely the most important issue for us to take a strong leadership role on and deliver something quickly. That's my view, and I hope that others in the council share that view.
Mr. White.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I thought Mr. Hart's comments were both apropos and eloquent on the topic, and that was very, very well put. I feel like the desal plant is an inflection point. It's something that's coming together, which we're looking at next month, making a commitment on, and I expect that we'll have universal or near universal support for that here, and that this small contribution here is one way that we can start to offset that setback in our carbon footprint. That's my greatest hesitation with the desal plant. It's my regret I can look back on all the woulda couldas that we have had over the last 5 years to do better with our water supply and have stalled off this decision one more year. But that's not what we have before us. We've got these decisions to make today. And Mr. Hart raising the questions about, or the concerns about, how we can't even get full compensation for a surplus in a certain spot. This is ice cream cone to the forehead material. This is dumb. And I'm also it's another one of the frustrations that I've been experiencing in our water concerns is our inability to move water around the state and basically buy water from people from willing sellers, and how restricted that market is. And it's another example of this. It just ought to be something where this ought to be fluid, liquid, and they're even related to each other. So I certainly will be supporting going forward with this in one reasonable way or another. And I thought Mr. Hart raised the point about, well, who should be taking the lead? At least there needs to be a strong conversation around that and an efficient pathway found to move forward with this as efficiently as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Litton. We have, I know, 2 other public comment speakers on this topic, so I'm going to go to them, and then I'll go to Ms. Murillo and Mr. Hotchkiss. But any other questions for Mr. Litton at this point? Yes. Okay, Mr. Hotchkiss.
This is a subsidized program, correct?
I wouldn't say that it's subsidized. It's ratepayer funded.
Well, every time, no, I think solar in general is subsidized, so this has got to be subsidized.
Currently, through
what happens when those subsidies go away?
The cost of solar panels has fallen so dramatically that we don't anticipate there being a significant change in the price of solar. If you look at the state rebate for solar, the state rebate was designed to fall in accordance with the falling price of panels, and now the state rebate is gone. And the state rebate's been gone for about 2 years, and there hasn't been 2 more successful years for solar in the state of California. So in 2 years, the federal subsidies will be gone, and we really still see solar being very, very widely adopted.
Mr. Dewey, will this be the premise on this is nothing to do with cost, but greenhouse gases? How will this affect cost for us and for ratepayers in the city?
Councilmember Hotchkiss, it really just depends on the market. You know, all of these different energy sources are priced at different levels.
Right.
And so it really depends on, you know, what you would do is hire what they call a load aggregator who would put together all of your energy portfolio for the community, and that can be determined by the community choice group. So they can choose to buy 30% renewables,
which would be a higher cost.
Gas.
Would that be a higher cost if you bought 30% renewables?
It really depends on the market forces. You know, you could
right now it would be, but not in the future.
If you had a portfolio that was 100% renewables, that would have a premium on it.
A higher cost, okay.
Yeah, but I mean, you can structure it such that there are savings. I mean, evidently, Marin, they're saying that they're having savings even though they have a higher renewable portion than Southern California or than PG&E does presently.
So, could the individual user decide what percentage he wanted to be renewables or whatever?
Well, the individual user could choose from among different programs.
Plans.
And it'd be the simplest thing would be for the CCA to provide, like 3 different programs, that have varying percentages of renewables.
And would everybody have to participate in that program? One of the choices?
No, you could opt out.
If you, by default, if you roll out a community choice aggregation, everyone is automatically signed up for CCA, okay? And then you can opt out and go back to Southern California Edison at that point if you choose. That's your choice.
The individual could?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to go. Thank you, Mr. Litton. We're going to go to John Broberg and then Bill Marks, and then we'll finish up the conversation up here.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor and Council members.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Madam Mayor and Council members. I'm a local business owner. I own a business that helps other businesses save energy. And I know this has been pretty well covered, a lot of things I would say, but I did want to look at it just briefly for fun from a business perspective as a what-if scenario. What if I could start a business like this CCA? And what I understood from the county was that over and above, after the feasibility study, there may be some $1 to $2 million startup costs, which a large part of which could be borrowed. And then I would be in a business where I'm guaranteed to have around 200,000 customers probably in the first few years. There'd be a revenue, possibly just looking from the Marin scenarios, $100 to $200 million. No one else could start up a CCA, so very low risk. And I don't have to pay corporate income tax. I don't have to pay dividends to shareholders. So that gives some room for supporting the customers better, also for renewable rebate programs, incentives, and that type of thing. So I looked up some of the financial statements from those two entities and how their net position has grown since inception, which I gave Jefferson to put those slides up. So that's Sonoma. Their first 3 quarters, you can see they've increased dramatically in what's called their net position. So they've been in the black almost since inception. And do we have the Marin one too? Marin was a slower start, but they're well into the black.
Great.
They have plenty of money to.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
And I just encourage you to support the feasibility study.
Thank you. Bill Marks.
Madam Mayor, council members, I am Bill Marks, speaking for the League of Women Voters of Santa Barbara. The League has been studying the proposed energy plan and wants to express support for a feasibility study for the creation of a community choice aggregation structure which can purchase clean energy in this area. We understand this will require a commitment of both time and financial resources, but we feel there are important benefits that make these efforts worthwhile. We feel that community choice aggregation, CCAs, are an important and effective response to global climate change. They are effective in both increasing the use of renewable energy and in using profits to support local energy efficiency conversions and to develop local renewable power. In doing this, they provide local control over electrical power sourcing and local jobs and investments. CCAs can also be an important part of our response to the California state mandates on greenhouse gas reductions. If the financial results are like those of other California CCAs, as we've seen, a local CCA would be able to pay back the feasibility and initial power contract startup costs in a matter of months, if not years. At the same time, providing electrical power at a cost less than that charged by the utilities. This cost reduction would provide long-term savings to local governments, local businesses, and local customers. We now benefit from the experience of other California CCAs and how to set up a CCA so that it is operationally transparent, provides for local input and control, and protects local governments and citizens from financial risk. We strongly support the funding of a feasibility study as the first step in the CCA process. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, so that concludes the facilities part. Ms. Murillo?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Casey, did we not give the feasibility study $5,000 last year? So do they need $45,000 now, or we never gave it to them? Who remembers that?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Murillo, we did budget $5,000 for that, but I don't believe we've spent it. So the net, you're correct, is $45,000.
Okay. Well, yay. Well, of course, I support community choice energy, and Councilmember Hart really said it very well, especially with the desal plant coming online. And I was just reading today about one of the ice shelves melting. So, right, we really should get busy on this. So it has my support, Madam Mayor.
Mr. Rouse?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I know that Mr. Davis and Mr. Litton try to walk me through this. I'm trying to. So we have Edison, from whom we've had a pretty substantial capital commitment to come in and repair infrastructure, and Edison then sells us power. So I'm trying to get my head around how Edison is made whole in this arrangement. Mr. Dewey, do you have a?
Yeah, Madam Mayor and Councilmember Rouse. Since deregulation, when deregulation occurred, Edison and the other investor-owned utilities had to divest themselves of all of their generation, except for hydropower and the nuclear power that they had. So now all of these generation stations around the state, and including renewables, belong to some third party, someone that we can buy power from. So energy generation, if you talk with Southern California Edison, they would say that they're neutral on who you buy energy from. They're not really in the energy sales business. They're in the business of providing energy through transmission and distribution. And all of our infrastructure requirements and the things that we're dealing with Southern California Edison right now deal with transmission and distribution. That wouldn't change under community choice aggregation. So community choice only provides for the kilowatt hours, the electrons transferred over those wires, and it doesn't change our relationship to Southern California Edison as far as infrastructure is concerned.
Okay, that's a good answer. Now, and then the peaker plant how does that play in, or does it play in? And that's an Edison. It's not an Edison facility. It's our facility.
Edison. Southern California Edison has built their own generation in the past, but chances are that if someone was going to site a peaker plant, it would probably be a third party that would site it and build it.
Thank you.
Well, being the only one up here that I think was up here in 2007, I'll stay consistent and perseverance, right? We can move forward with this. But I want to appreciate everyone who is keeping this moving and keeping that conversation. I think what it was in 2007, the city said, when others are ready to play, we can play with them. And so now finally we're getting to that point. And so I look forward to the conversation moving forward. A feasibility study makes the most sense about the next step to move forward. I also want to appreciate the combining of business owners with CEC on this. And I see Mr. Yates in the back, and I know the resiliency and reliability of the current power structure is very much in the forefront of our minds as well. And I think there's a lot of points that Mr. Lenton, you mentioned that can help with the reliability of local power because it's produced locally here and stayed within the local area. So being the end of the line for Southern California Edison, I think those are other issues why that's worth doing this feasibility study and seeing what can work. So I appreciate the combination of the coalition members here. And this will be on our June 2nd listing. Is it June 2nd? The June 1st? The list of various things that's not in the budget to ask for in terms of moving monies around, or there are other requests for funding. So this will certainly be on the list, and I think it sounds like we could get there. I hope so. Mr. Hart.
I think that our conversation has surfaced this who's in charge issue in addition to the budget issue, which I understand the budget issue is going to be resolved on June 2nd. But, I guess just counting votes here, it sounds to me like there's interest in the city speaking with the county about who might potentially take the lead on this. I don't know if Mr. Casey's hearing that direction from the council, if we're agendized to make a motion about that, or just what exactly the next step in that would be.
Not agendized today for that, but I think we need to have those conversations with the county. Mr. Casey? Oh, just that?
Madam Mayor, council members, right. I don't believe we're agendized. I'm clearly hearing it from you, Councilmember Hart. I'm hearing interest in supporting CCA, but I haven't been hearing as thoroughly that the city should take the lead. I think certainly talking with the county. I just 10 minutes before this meeting received a letter from the county administrator asking, for people's interest. So they're going out and soliciting interest, and so we should have that conversation.
Well, so you're not counting to 4 by what's been said so far, and I get that. I don't know that I probably more optimistically counting to 4, but it sounds to me like Councilmember White is supportive of us having a conversation with the county about taking the lead. I wonder if Councilmember Murillo and Mayor Schneider are both interested in that as well.
I think the conversation, I don't know what it means to take the lead. So I think, and we are going to want to, I think it's, and want to hear from CEC too. I think it's a worthy conversation to have. And so certainly want to keep on the table, but I want to know more information first. Ms. Murillo.
If it means they're going to pay for more because they have their staff working on it, that's kind of a good thing for us. But if it means they have control over something we want control over, I'm not being, combative or anything, but I have a good relationship with some of the people over there. I'm willing to have a conversation and see. I'm with you, Madam Mayor, not sure what it would mean to take the lead. But heck yeah, let's take the lead. How's that?
Well, now I can count to 3.
Okay.
So,
Mr. White?
Well, what I'm hearing, though, to be the process here would be to, what we could do today is to ask that this, or to move that this be agendized for a future meeting. So, is that right? No, would that be correct? So
That's
move.
a great step. I'll second that.
Okay, so the motion is to agendize for a future meeting, I would assume, after hearing that we have the money to pay for the feasibility study, right? So that won't take too long to figure out the next steps as related to
the how.
The how. You got that, Susan? The how.
Right.
It's a very technical term. The how. Okay. Any questions on the motion? Sure. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Okay. That was not a no. That's meaning there wasn't anyone opposed. It was unanimous. Okay. We have a whole bunch of other things related to our Public Works Department budget we need to get to, and you're welcome to stay and listen. It's fascinating, I promise you. But if you do want to leave, please take your conversations out into the hallway so we can keep going, and thank you for being here today on this important topic. With that, Ms. Bjork, you are on again.
Madam Mayor, council members, I'd like to introduce Pat Kelly, our city engineer and assistant public works director, to present our engineering division's budget.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor and council member. As the city engineer, also am the manager of the engineering division. And the engineering division has 4 operating divisions. So let me walk you through that. First of all, it's engineering services program. Many of you are familiar with as far as the contracts and capital improvement program updates that I bring to staff, bring to the council. And we focus on delivering the capital project program. Here I have a picture of one of our inspectors that's a part of that program. We have almost 40 full-time equivalents and a total budget of over $5 million. Take a step back here for a second and start talking about a little bit about our land development program, which we closely coordinate with our community development and fire department as part of the land development team. There we have about 7.5 full-time equivalents and a budget of over $1 million. Also, we have the traffic engineering program. Here's a picture of the recently constructed new traffic signal at Arriaga, and they work closely with our police department and our alternative transportation program regarding those issues in delivering the capital program. There are over 4 full-time equivalents in that program and a budget of over $2.5 million. Finally, as part of the traffic signal operational program, we also have 2.3 full-time equivalents there. It's a maintenance program focused on keeping the 116 traffic signals that we have with a budget of over $1 million. Most of that is in supplies and materials. So there's a total of 53 people in the division. In addition, we have one non-operational program, and we are the program owner per our P3 program, our performance measures program for the Streets Capital, where we work closely with our transportation and our facilities division in prioritizing those projects. So getting into some of the details in the budget, we have an engineering program is part of the general fund, and Rebecca talked about how engineering fits into that. It is funded by chargeback, also mentioned by Rebecca, of how we bill our time to delivering the capital program. Also, we have some work that we have as a small general fund subsidy to fund non-capital project work. For instance, assisting different general fund departments in developing programs and responding to the city attorney's office. Also, as part of our land development real property program, that is funded by chargeback fees, also in the general fund. For the last several years, we have met all of our costs, so our fees exceed our costs for the last several years, and we're on track to move forward in that direction. We have a fee increase this particular year in parallel with our planning division of community development at 3%, we have one additional new fee, which is for the managing the maintenance of news racks, which we've had a significant amount of input over the years, and we finally have a program that we're running through our ordinance committee, et cetera, to be able to maintain those. Then our traffic engineering and traffic signal crews are funded by our streets funds, primarily utility users tax. And then also we have a significant amount of grant funding, in particular in traffic engineering, where our traffic engineer has been quite good at getting grant funds, in particular our Highway Safety Improvement Program funds. For example, a recent $1 million worth of upgrades to our traffic signals to make them more visible. So for 2016, some of the highlights, big highlight I've been talking about for many years, and here's a picture of the Cabrillo Bridge. And then also there we have a significant amount of effort going on down at for delivering additional water supply in response to the drought. Here's a picture of our Ortega well treatment plant. Also, we have a significant number of traffic safety improvements. In particular, we were very successful in the active transportation program, where we got over $5 million of new grants there, and then also working on leveraging our limited capital program funding in streets to deliver more grants, in particular also for our bridges. So when you add all that up, we have over 80 projects that we're actively working on in design and construction for a value of almost $200 million. So here I have a picture of our webpage, and Mr. Green talked about some improvements we could make to that. And if you clicked on government, Santa Barbara.gov engineering or Santa Barbara.gov major projects map, you'll get this pops up, and where we will show you some of the major projects under construction and design. And this is part of our community outreach effort, and that's intended to be able to communicate with the public more than just that here we come, and we also want to engage the public to understand what we're doing so that it can support our work and inconveniences that this type of maintenance does include as far as maintaining the project, maintaining our city's infrastructure. We work essentially as a private engineering firm for the city to deliver the capital program. As part of that, we have performance measures to track our financial accountability. We've been doing that for over 20 years, and we compete right there with our local engineers, where we provide, the constant service, and we use a significant amount of local engineering firms to fill in the valleys, or rather the peaks of work, and also special expertise for traffic signals, let's say, or at our treatment plants. Here's an example. I'll go through this quickly because you've probably seen it so many times, and that's just an example of how we try to use council meetings as part of our quarterly update of the capital program to inform the public of all the different work that we're doing. In particular, this one, we have several city capital projects, the Cabrillo Bridge and Mason Street Bridge, which we've talked about a lot. But also here's the Entrada project and some work that Sonos is doing at Beacons, and then a very interesting children's museum, which is now called the Museum of Exploration and Innovation. And then also the county is moving forward with the delivery of the Lower Mission Creek project, which includes these reaches. So here's just some photos of some of the interesting projects we have. Here's the completed Chapala Bridge. And this picture is intended to show that there's a lot of infrastructure that the public just doesn't see. And this is the influent pumping plants down at El Estero. And here's the Mason Street project, which pretty much everybody does see if you drive down Cabrillo Boulevard. So to wrap up the discussion of engineering services, here's a graph I've shown before, and this is just tracking the amount of capital projects that we've filed notices of completion on. And for next fiscal year, for this fiscal year, we're projected to do almost $30 million, and the following year, almost $40 million. For 2014, just for your information, is that 28% of that $50 million was grant funded. The remaining was primarily enterprises through airport, water, wastewater, et cetera, and no general fund in completed projects in 2014. Although we do know that some funding is going to be available for general fund in the future, so we'll be tracking that in the future. And then just FYI, we track about a little over about $4 million a year that we spend monthly on delivering the capital program. So that adds up to about $45 million a year in capital program expenditures. And generally, it's been discussed that the ability of capital projects provides, economic engine of sorts in locally, and there's a multiplying factor, and different people use that. One Google search had it 1.36, which meant that for every dollar spent locally, that's an additional 1.36 of other income for the neighborhood. And like I say, much of that is grant funded. Here we have a map of our pavement condition, and I got a little trick here that blows it up, and here shows that we have a color coding of the condition of our streets, where red is for at risk, and then green is in good shape, whereas the other colors of blue is considered at risk, and orange is poor. So we get a sense that there's a lot of work to be done in our pavement system in the city. Our average is about at 64 out of 100, of which we are looking forward to spending a limited amount of money. Unfortunately, we have only about $2.6 million per year out of our streets capital that goes towards pavement improvements. The rest of the streets capital goes into things like miscellaneous drainage costs to support the Lower Mission Creek project, matching grant funds, et cetera. Moving on to our land development program. Here, some of the highlights for next year is supporting Edison and moving forward with their infrastructure improvements. They come in and get traffic control permits for all their work, a significant source of income for the program. But also part of that is timing that such that it's not an unreasonable inconvenience to the public. Some work is going to be an inconvenience. For example, recently they had construction at Carrillo and St. Vincent. Even though they worked all night long, the number 2 lane was blocked. But there is no avoiding that because, unfortunately, they had a vault right in the middle of the sidewalk. So we do our best to minimize the impact to the public. Again, Entrada is a big effort for us. And then as part of our real property staff, they provide support for the property acquisition. Working towards traffic engineering, our other operational program. Besides, keeping traffic flowing through town, a key function of our traffic engineering group is to provide safety for all modes of travel, vehicular, bicycle, and pedestrian. Traffic engineering is one of the 3 E's of traffic safety. Namely, engineering is that E. Other 2 being education and enforcement. So traffic engineering works very closely with our police department regarding enforcement, and also with our alternative transportation program regarding enforcing. The engineers do a significant amount of work of tracking traffic counts, where collisions are located, optimizing traffic signal timing, and then also locating new bike lanes and pedestrian facilities whenever possible as part of as part of when we have to do that type of work as part of our resurfacing. Responding to the public and public requests is a significant task as part of this program. And that makes sense, and from the perspective is that it's appropriate since the community is a key means of obtaining information about changes and trends and how people move around town. And finally, our traffic signal program is simply maintenance repair of 116 active traffic signals, including the one that was just built. And we have 8 pedestrian activated flashers that we're also maintaining. And some of the key issues that we're always working on is, optimizing traffic signal timing for all modes of traffic, in particular our vehicles. And with that, be very happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Rouse?
So, Mr. Kelly, obviously one of the big issues around the beach areas is the staging and traffic and circulation.
Yes.
Somebody put a question the other day. They understood that Caltrans was planning to refit of the Castillo underpass this summer. What do you know about that?
That is correct. They are planning to try another repair of that underpass. You're probably familiar with the attempts in the past to put in pavers. That was followed by putting in a unique electronic pulse system that was top secret that they got from the silos of North Dakota from the U.S. Army of Engineers. Unfortunately, there's more water in Santa Barbara than there is in North Dakota, and that system unfortunately failed. And so they're going back to putting in pavers again. The only other option is to reconstruct the entire intersection in a more modern or more successful construction method as we have at Garden Street. In the meantime, while they're waiting for funding for complete reconstruction, which is many years off and very, very expensive, they're planning to do a repair this summer. And this summer, they've timed it to coincide with the downtime of the City College. So they're trying, because that's one of the most busiest intersections in town, and a lot of it is traffic going to and from the school.
No, I understand that.
They've tried to get it in the least impact 6 weeks this summer.
No, I get that. And the concern that I have, especially from the waterfront merchants, is that right now State Street is impassable going from east to west, or just not State Street, but Cabrillo. We have definitely peak impacts on Garden, and trying to navigate people into town to the harbor, oftentimes coming from the freeway to bring them through Castillo. Well, that's an option. I think there's going to need to be some communication publicly and certainly with those people who are affected by that traffic, because I understand that the City College is the biggest impact on the intersection, but you have the rest of the city we're trying to run at the same time. I'm looking at Mr. Allen back there too, thinking about this plan and this flow. I think we're going to have an issue. And I know we don't control what Caltrans does and when they do it, but it's a conversation I think we need to.
Absolutely, and we can provide a report back regarding the outreach that Caltrans is planning and what we are planning to try to minimize the inconvenience to the public.
Right, I would not count on Caltrans for that outreach, especially to our people down by the beach, our hotels and restaurants and whatnot, because they're already starting to rattle the cage here a little bit.
I'll report back.
Thank you.
Since they're going to be doing it this summer, we want to make sure that the Fiesta Parade day is something they can work around. Let's make sure that all the horses and carriages can get through that intersection on that particular day. It looks like it might be right in the middle of whatever it is they're trying to do. So talking to them now, and we know when the parade is, because that would be a nightmare to try to reroute. I don't know how you would do it, actually, the parade. So the sooner we talk to them, the better.
I'm pretty sure they're already aware, but I'll make sure.
Okay.
Because that is absolutely correct.
Great. Okay. Any other questions on this item? Great. Okay, on to the fleet.
Thank you. Gary Horwald is our fleet manager. Will present the fleet budget.
Fleet Management's division portion of the Public Works budget. Fleet management is made up of two programs: fleet maintenance and operations and fleet replacement. And looking at the revenues for fleet management, the fleet maintenance fund has remained relatively flat, status quo for the year. And the fleet replacement, you'll see an increase of almost 19%. And that's reflective of the increase in cost of the purchase of vehicles, as evidenced by the sharp increase that we've seen with police cars and fire trucks. Looking at the expenditure side, call your attention to the line item for special projects. The sharp increase there is reflective of a planned project to replace the diesel fuel tank at the city corporate yard. We'll talk about it a little bit later in the presentation. And the sharp reduction in the equipment line item reflects the completion of the fleet facility project that was nearing completion in 2015. And then the allocated cost, the drop in allocated cost is the result of part of the building maintenance allocated cost being transferred to the supplies and services line item, and you'll see a corresponding reduction and increase in those two line items. This is the fleet management team, and there's 15 full-time employees in fleet management. And the city's fleet is made up of about 483 vehicles valued with a replacement value over $36 million. And our primary goals are to maintain the equipment and vehicles in a safe condition, maximize the availability of the equipment, preserve the capital value, and to plan for the eventual replacement of them at the end of their service life. A large part of the operation is the maintenance and repair of the city's fleet. This is a picture of the staff performing a variety of maintenance services on a large variety of equipment that we have. And we do much of the repairs in-house, and we also do with contractual support for specialized repairs like glass work, auto body, and paint work, that kind of thing. Fleet's responsible for the vehicle pool program. You guys have heard about it before, but it's to facilitate the sharing of vehicles and equipment. There's 3 locations. They're fairly heavily used. We do about 18,000 transactions a year and over 250,000 miles a year. And the large benefit of sharing vehicles across the divisions and the departments is that we're able to meet the city's transportation needs with fewer number of vehicles and equipment. We had, after the initial success we had with cars, we expanded it to trucks and equipment, and we hope to increase that even further by adding equipment to it in 2016 and 17. The city's refueling infrastructure falls under Fleet's responsibility. We maintain the city's fuel inventory and provide billing services to accurately allocate the cost of fuel to the consumers of fuel. And there's a number of federal and state mandates that govern fleet operations. These are 3 of the largest, the first being exhaust emission testing and certification. For diesel vehicles, we do an analysis of the exhaust emissions, and for gasoline-powered vehicles, similar to your own car where you certify it, you get it smog tested and certified, and reports are filed with the Bureau of Automotive Repair. Also with the commercial vehicle inspections for the larger vehicles in the fleet, excuse me, those are inspected every 90 days, and meticulous records are kept and have to be filed again with the Bureau of Automotive Repair. And then the diesel exhaust retrofits refers to a program through the California Air Resources Board requiring cleaning up the exhaust emissions of diesel vehicles on-road and off-road. The on-road is pretty much done for the city. Our efforts are focused on the off-road, and it's a pretty costly program, and so we try to minimize the fiscal impact by aligning this program with the fleet replacement program to keep the costs down. On the replacement side, Fleet, as I said, is responsible for managing a replacement fund in order to replace the vehicles in a timely manner we work with the departments to purchase the most fuel-efficient vehicles that we can, identify alternative fuel or advanced technology vehicles that will meet the department's needs. In the upper right is a picture of the latest addition to the pool car fleet, is a Ford Fusion gas-electric hybrid vehicle. And then in the lower section on the left-hand side is the old police patrol cars that are being phased out. And on the right side is the latest patrol vehicle that was put into service as a Chevrolet Caprice. And looking forward into 2016, you'll be seeing some of the larger patrol vehicles similar to what we have at the airport or that the California Highway Patrol uses. So during and immediately following the economic downturn, fleet replacements were deferred when we could, and that's starting to catch up us with this a little bit. And so you see the spike in 2015, which will continue a little bit less into 16 and 17 as we replace some of those vehicles that were deferred. And then, as I mentioned, we have a plan for 2016 to remove the diesel fuel tank that's in ground at the city corporate yard and to replace it with an above-ground tank that's compatible with the biodiesel. And we intend to do this in cooperation with Facilities, who's got a project to replace failing pavement with concrete from Ortega to Laguna Street at the same time. And that's fleet. I'm available for any questions if you have them.
Any questions? Mr. White.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. Can you go back to the vehicles and the expenditures there? You saw that there was a big, right there. So what are we looking at there? We're looking at that $1 million or less or thereabouts went into the fund until 2015, and now we're seeing $5 million go in, or is that purchasing of vehicles, or what are we?
Yeah, Councilmember White, this is reflective of the expenditures, and it can be a little bit misleading. There's a little bit of lag time there because some of the spike that you see in 2015, this chart is reflective of when the contract was closed, so when the vehicles were paid for. So some of these vehicles were ordered in 2014 and ended up being paid in 2015. But yeah, so the from 2014 to 2015, you see some of the vehicles that were paid for, totaling over $5 million there between what was 14 and then what's projected for 15.
So going back to 2009 or earlier, money was coming in from the departments into the fleet management program and accumulating, but we weren't buying more vehicles. That's what's being reflected by the chart. There were, I remember we did have like a new ladder truck that came in on. Well, that's probably an entire one of those bars there, so the money was coming in and accumulating, and then the purchases, however, for the replacements didn't occur until now. We have this, as you say, spike going on. Would that be a fair characterization?
Yes, that's a partially an accurate characterization. The only difference was during a couple of those years, the money coming into the fleet replacement reserves, particularly for police and fire, was reduced for a couple of years below the level that they needed to pay in to support the level of vehicles that we have planned for purchase.
That was one of the recession management strategies that was undertaken.
Exactly.
Okay. Thank
you.
Well,
we also did not purchase vehicles because of the motor pool program. So I think some of that could have been that normally when we would have purchased a number, I think it was something like a good number of vehicles that normally would have replaced that were not. We just reduced the size of the fleet because we're more efficient with the cars that we have, correct? And I forget how many, something like 8 or 12 or I don't know, some good number of vehicles.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, that's accurate. It's difficult to keep track of as we reduce the number of vehicles, it's difficult to keep track of how many were directly a result of the pool program or how many were a result of downsizing or that. But certainly we probably reduced the fleet by 15 vehicles over that time, and a number of the vehicles that would have been planned to be replaced weren't replaced as a result of the consolidation there.
Right, and I remember kind of that happening in 2006, 7, 8 time period. That's when I'm remembering when that occurred. So that would make sense, actually, looking at those numbers.
Well, and I remember there was one, as I recall, there was a truck, a big truck or two that they were trying to rationalize the use of that amongst some departments as well. Is there a spreadsheet or something to that effect that says, here's our list of vehicles, here's what their depreciation schedule? I mean, I'm imagining that's just how you put together this whole thing. This thing gets distilled down to out of a massive amount of data about how many we have, how old they are, when do they need replaced, how much are they worth, and all that kind of stuff. Is that right?
Yes, we when we purchase a vehicle, we establish an expected life cycle for the vehicle, and anticipated, based on that, an anticipated replacement date. And then as we approach that, we monitor that and we look for opportunities. Can we extend that life cycle? Does it need replacement on this schedule? Sure. And that's what we try to do is get the most life out of each of these vehicles that we can. And
so how are we in terms of, as we were talking about with our streets, as we're talking about with Mr. Dewey was talking about with our buildings, do we have an unfunded liability there or not? I'm imagining if we were not putting money into this system for the recession years, totally understandable strategy if we're able to squeeze some years out of it, but that's going to result in an unfunded liability going forward.
Well, Madam Mayor, Councilmember White, it's a good news story a little bit with the fleet because we are well funded. As far as that goes, we're on track with the replacements that we're planning. There's a little bit of flexibility in there. Like I say, if a vehicle's scheduled for replacement in 2016, we might be able to push it out to 2017, and we do that kind of thing when we can. So the fleet program is fully funded for the replacement, and there essentially isn't an unfunded liability. We're on track.
Okay, thank you.
On to transportation.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, council members. Browning Allen, our transportation manager, will cover the transportation. And as I see some of you looking through your budget pages, I'm sorry I didn't call them out sooner. These start on H368. H368.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the City Council. So I'm going to talk about the Transportation Division as well as the funding that goes into streets. So the Transportation Division has several programs. We have the Transportation Planning, Alternative Transportation, Drainage System Maintenance, or our street maintenance folks, the Street Sweeping Program, Downtown Parking Program, as well as we oversee the Neighborhood Improvement Task Force. It's a multi-department program that we work in looking at neighborhood issues and work closely with the Neighborhood Advisory Council in developing the applications for the Community Development Block Grant that we submit every year. In terms of where we see our revenue, this is a snapshot of all the funds that come into streets. It includes the money that we use for capital. The top three numbers are what we receive. The utility user tax is the number we get from our finance department. The gas tax number is the number we get from the State Department of Finance. You notice they're projecting a 13.7% reduction from FY15, primarily because people are buying less gasoline. And then we're seeing an 8.7 increase in the Measure A. Measure A is our portion of the state sales tax that is part of the ballot measure that was adopted and went into place in 2010. So as the sales tax increases, we see, and the economy improves, we'll see the Measure A number go up. The other area I want to kind of highlight in the area of other revenue, you see this 12% reduction is primarily because We're not doing a major cleanup next year with the Union Pacific, and that's primarily the number you would normally see in that area. In terms of our expenditures, some areas that I want to just highlight quickly, supplies and services are going down just a little bit. Primarily, we're moving the money that Mr. Dewey mentioned in terms of the money we pay for the energy for the traffic signals and street lights out of streets and special supplies and supplies and services, but it's going to be reflected in the next line in allocated cost. And the other area of the allocated cost, that's about $600,000. And we're also going to see, Mr. Dewey also mentioned that the annex yard, they're taking over the management of that, so we're seeing allocated costs coming in that area as well. The other change I just wanted to highlight, you notice the 11% reduction in capital expenditures. Again, that's primarily grants and the projects that we have working on, primarily what engineering division oversees. So as they have grant projects available, you see the revenue coming in, and we'll see the expenditures going out.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Allen, can you clarify the transfer to Parks and Rec number? Or what is that comprised of?
That is the money that we send over to Parks and Rec. It's UUT funds that we give Parks and Rec for the maintenance of the urban forest program, and a small portion of that money goes towards the maintenance of the landscape medians. The first program I want to talk about is our transportation planning program. We're part of the land development team along with engineering. We work closely with community development and the fire department in the review of private development projects, as well as some city projects that might come through the land development process. We have 3 planners that are assigned to this program. As Ms. Bjork mentioned, that in the proposed budget is having one of those planners paid out of the general fund. In years past, we had 2.5 out of the general fund. Again, we're trying to free up some of the streets money that can go back into a capital improvement program. Rob Dayton and I are also involved with the SBCAG, Santa Barbara County Association of Government Regional Transportation Coordination, again serving as the chair of the Technical Transportation Advisory Committee. Rob is also working closely with community development with the implementation of the general plan. And Rob is on the team working with the Caltrans and the county on the design of the 101 HOV lane. And then we also supply support to our city's Transportation and Circulation Committee. In the area of alternative transportation, we have contracts with MTD for the downtown waterfront shuttle and Easy Lift for paratransit service. The agreement we have with both agencies indicates that they would get an increase in the contract based on the CPI as of January of each calendar year. This January, the CPI was minus 0.06, so their contract will not increase for next fiscal year to remain at the FY15 level. Included in the budget, because when we developed the budget, we did not know what the CPI was going to be, so we have built in a 3% increase, but we are not going to be needing those funds for these 2 contracts. We also have an agreement with COAST, the Coalition for Sustainable Transportation. They manage our Safe Route to School program. They're the ones that go into the school, and they do the education of our students. And they work closely with the Bicycle Coalition in coordinating the efforts at the elementary, junior high school, and high school levels. And then we have our employee work trip program, our alternative transportation program for our employees. It's one of the programs that we developed about 6 years ago to encourage our employees to use alternative forms of transportation to get to work. It's a very popular program. And we have one employee that manages that program, and this year we've moved it into a separate fund so we can better track how those monies are being used. And we're currently in the process of updating the Bicycle Master Plan. Over the weekend, we had our first two community summits. We have one tonight at Peabody School, then one tomorrow night at the downtown at the library and the Faulkner Gallery. Then we have one at Washington School on Wednesday night, and all 3 nights are at 6 p.m.
What was the attendance at the weekend events?
The weekend, it was not as what we had expected. I think the one on the east side had around 10 residents, and on the west side around 7 to 9 attending. 7 or 9.
No, there was more than that. I'm sorry to contradict you, but I went to the West Side one, 20 people?
We had a number of staff people there too. So,
Oh,
but,
okay. I
yeah.
still disagree with you, but
Okay.
thanks.
Well, I'll double check with my staff. Those are numbers I got this morning, but hopefully we did have more than that.
Thank you, Mr. Allen.
We're hoping we see more people tonight. We anticipate quite a more people at the downtown summit. We'll report out as we hear more on that. We are looking at going to our Transportation Circulation Committee and Planning Commission in early July to give a result of the surveys as well as the neighborhood summits as well as the road shows that our staff has been attending over the last few weeks. We write grants. We have one person in particular, one of our project planners who writes grants right now. She's working with engineering, developing the next round of the active transportation planning program, as well as writing the grants for the Community Development Block Grant Program. And then we oversee the bike station contract. And then last week, the Vice President of Operations from Bike Station was at the Downtown Parking Committee, and he presented their annual report to the Downtown Parking Committee. And once I get a copy of that PowerPoint presentation, I'll be happy to share that with the City Council. Street maintenance is our next area I want to talk about. These are the guys that you can see wearing the yellow shirts. We do pavement, concrete repair, striping, curb and crosswalk painting, graffiti removal, and street signs. And this picture here, I just put this in here because it's a variety of work that we do. Pothole in the middle of the street. Over here, we're replacing a concrete sidewalk as well as curb and gutter. Our crews will do replacement of curb and gutter that cannot wait for the annual contract that we send out. We want to make sure we're dealing with the very severe ones that can't wait. Sign crew, not all our signs are in the median in a parkway. Some of them are either in a brick parkway or across a sidewalk. Requires different methods, whether it be a cord cutting material, or in this case, we're using a torch to cut off an old pole that we're going to be removing. As well as we do some minor overlay. We can't do major overlay, but we'd have to rent equipment. But we're scaling back and just doing minor overlay just to keep our roads in decent shape.
Mr. Rouse and then Mr. Hotchkiss.
Mr. Allen, could you know roughly out of that $5.8 million what percentage is pavement?
No, I don't have that number, but a lot of that number is the personnel that work in the various crews. I can get the number that we spend on pavement, and we do both the asphalt and concrete. And then we have another number. We have $250,000 in our capital money program that we use for sidewalks. Yes.
It seems to me there's been less graffiti recently. Am I wrong?
Well, graffiti abatement or problems we have with graffiti is kind of seasonal. We see an uptick of graffiti during the breaks when school's out and when the weather's good. And we usually bring on an hourly employee to help out. But we haven't seen as much graffiti on the Union Pacific corridor, but we're out there weekly to remove the graffiti. And we have areas where we know we're going to see graffiti, and our employee that is assigned to that program gets out there right away to remove the hot spots. So a lot of it could be the fact that our staff is doing a good job of removing it. It's not staying up there as long. But again, it's seasonal. We will see when school's out, unfortunately, we do see an increase in graffiti.
How do we handle it when it appears on a bridge over the 101? It's a Caltrans thing.
It's Caltrans' responsibility, so we do notify Caltrans. They don't fall within the 3-day time period as our private citizens do, primarily because they have to close a lane to remove the graffiti on the bridge. So we'll notify Caltrans, and they'll come and take care of it. If it's on the underpass, such as the Garden Street underpass, we take care of that with our staffs.
We do the underpass, they do the overpass.
Correct.
Thanks.
We also are available for emergency response, whether it be for a water main break or we have a rain event where we have debris in the roadway. We'll go out there with our crews, as well as we utilize our private contractor to come out with a sweeper to assist us. We work closely with the police department for neighborhood cleanups. We use now the SWAP workers, work alternative program to do the cleanups. We've done quite a few this year. the area of the Union Pacific cleanups. We're focusing right now on taking care of graffiti. We've did a really good job over the first few years of this program addressing the overgrown vegetation, and the need hasn't been there. Top that with the fact that we haven't had a lot of rain, so we haven't seen the vegetation growing back as quickly as we have seen in the past. And then we are available for the setup for special events. I was just talking to our streets manager today, and we're now heading into the special event season where we're doing the setup for the special events. We have Solstice coming up, the 4th of July parade, Fiesta. Our staff provides that support, as well as the cleanup after those events. Our street sweeping program, we are currently sweeping just over 80% of our city streets. The streets that we are not sweeping either are too narrow, they're windy, don't have curb and gutter, or they're just remote areas of the city where it's just not feasible for our operator to get up there and sweep them on a regular basis. We're still sweeping over 17,000 curb miles annually. We don't sweep on city-recognized holidays. This past year, we had one resident complaining that we were out there on Veterans Day. That's not a city-recognized holiday. We've been sweeping on that day from day one. What we started doing a couple of years ago is putting a notice in the newspaper, as well as putting on our website the days when sweeping is canceled, so residents know. Plus we have it on our sweeping hotline. Last year, we collected over 4.7 million pounds of debris, primarily because we did not have very many days canceled because of rain. And we tell the residents, if you see water in the gutter, running down the gutter, we're not going to sweep that day, but either go to the website or call the hotline just to verify that we're not going to be sweeping that day.
How many actual street sweepers do we have?
Well, it's by contract. So how many the contractor needs to provide that service. We have the residential program as well as the commercial program. And then this past year, we added a few streets, the APS area near the 5 Points roundabout. We've added a few more streets on a quarterly basis of the sweeping program. One thing that we are recommending, as our staff recommend an adjustment to the proposed budget, is moving the MPDES permit. It's our permit that we have to pay to the state of California annually. It was paid out of the street sweeping program, and we're moving it into the Streets Reserve. The Creeks Advisory Committee took exception to the sweeping program paying for that. So being responsive to their concerns, we're going to move that out of the sweeping program and take it out of the reserve, which means it's about a $30,000 cost that will reduce from with money that's available for capital. This number here just talks about the revenues that we have coming into the sweeping program. We've made a couple of adjustments to the sweeping program in terms of revenue. Again, the $150,000 comes from streets. That is 100% going into the commercial program. The Measure B number, this is a number that's in the proposed budget, but with the reduction of $30,000 for the MPDES permit and some other adjustments, the actual number of Measure B funds that we'll be requesting for next year will be $70,322. And annually, what we'll do is take a look at our needs for the residential program after we get the estimate for citation revenue and our expenses, and only ask for Measure B to bridge the gap between our citation revenue and what our actual expenses are. And let's see, allocated costs. In the allocated costs, really the only primarily changes are just reductions in our overhead and our support for GIS, and we saw a slight decrease in workers' compensation rates. And moving on to our downtown parking program, we operate and maintain our city parking lots as well as coordinate with the on-street parking supply. The time limit parking for the parking spaces on the street are 75 minutes, which corresponds with a 75-minute free period we have in our parking lots. We're staffed 361 days out of the year. We are closed on Thanksgiving Day, Christmas, New Year's, and Easter Sunday. The lots are open to the public but parking is free on those days. We have 3,300 parking spaces, 5 structures, 7 surface lots, as well as the 2 commuter lots and the Helena Street lot. The Helena lot is a timed parking. It's 90-minute time parking. It's enforced by the parking enforcement officers. The 2 commuter lots are a subscription lot, and they pay for those on a monthly basis. And then we continue to oversee the Safe RV parking program with New Beginnings. It's a contract we've had with them for a number of years. And they park in the Coda lot and the Creo lot, and both lots are at capacity right now. And then we provide staff support to our downtown parking committee.
Since you mentioned the lots, I just want to acknowledge the work about the final declaration, I guess, from the Department of Finance at the state, which has now moved the railroad depot parking lots to the city and Paseo Nuevo, and is that still in the? So we're done with everything related to the redevelopment agency, and we have all the parking lots back, and so that was a huge win. I was just asking about it last week, and then all of a sudden the email came Friday, right? So congratulations, and I know Mr. Bossi's not here today, but that's a huge win. So yay. Okay, just wanted to say that. Okay, go ahead.
This pie chart just shows this is where our revenue comes from, hourly parking being our number 1 revenue source from their downtown parking program. Then we have our subscription and fees. Primarily, that's monthly parking and the commuter lots. And then the parking business improvement assessment is the next area. I like this chart just to show how people are using our parking lots. As you can see, the 75-minute free period, 61% are still parking for free. So we generate that $5+ million in these other categories here, primarily the $153 and $450 area. This chart here is just showing our revenues. Again, we're looking at an increase in our hourly revenues. We have projected 4.88 for FY15. We're projecting 5.2. The economy is better. People are coming downtown. They're parking. At some point in time, I don't think it's going to continue to rise as rapidly as it has been rising. At some point in time, it's going to flatten out unless we can figure out a way to get that 61% to stay a little bit longer. We were hoping that when we brought in the credit cards, people would stay longer because they don't have to look for $1.50 and change. But we are seeing that over 25% of our transactions are by credit card, which means that's less cash that we have to handle at the kiosk as well as at the offices. The monthly parking fees, we raised the rate. Actually, monthly parking is right in line. We had one lot that was out of service for a while, but that was lot 6 because we were doing the 911 call center. We weren't selling any parking permits, monthly parking permits in that. It's up and running again, so we're now selling more in that lot. The commuter lot, we thought we would see it remaining flat between 14 and 15 because we raised the rate for the Coda commuter lot. That lot continues to be a very popular lot, and we still have a waiting list for people to park in that lot. In the area of rents and property, this is primarily the money we get from the Metropolitan Theater Corporation for renting the property by Lot 9, the Fiesta 5. And then we have $48,000 in there for the Greyhound lease. The big change here in, let's see, special projects. Yeah, the big change in this expenditure in special projects was the downtown safety guide program that we were looking at doing last year, where we had general fund money for that, which was moved over into the police department. So we're just reflecting that adjustment. Some of the major work efforts we're going to be working on next fiscal year: Lot 3 Paseo improvements. We're currently doing conceptual design on that. Lighting study for our parking lots, primarily our surface lots. We want to start now, especially this has been on hold. The next one, the conceptual design of the lot adjacent to the Fish Enterprise It's this lot over here. This is Montecito Street over here, State Street. The Enterprise Fish Company is right here. This lot is a time parking, 90 minutes. Parking enforcement from the police department does the enforcement. We're not generating any revenue out of that lot. However, we have to maintain the lot, and we're going to do a slurry seal on this lot, and we have some ADA improvements we need to do to the lot. So we're doing a study to see how we can incorporate that into the depot lot or come with other means to trying to generate some revenue on the lot so it can basically pay for itself.
On the Lot 3 Paseo, are you restoring the trellis that was once there?
We are looking at a variety of things. We're doing some conceptual. One of the things we are looking at possibly doing is restoring the trellis. It was an old wood.
Because the pillars are still there, just waiting for something to be put up.
Right. So we're not really sure exactly what we're going to do there. So we're hiring an architect to assist us with coming up with a concept. It's on the HLC, so we're going to have to work closely with the Historic Landmarks Commission. One of the ideas is to put some type of trellis back there. Whether or not we keep those columns or put something different there, we're not really sure. But it does look kind of barren there, and you look at it, you got the dumpster in the foreground, then you have another trash container in the back. We want to see what we can do to kind of hide the trash containers as well as beautifying this. This is not very attractive for people walking through there. So
no, I agree, but I hope we're not spending a ton of money to figure out what to do next.
No, we're not spending a lot of money, but the money that we want to spend is to actually go in the ground there. We're just trying to figure out what's going to go in there and make sure it's going to...
Because it looks like some very superficial changes could make a huge difference.
Possibly, but then we have to go through the review boards. And we see the eyesore, though, of the trash cans. We just want to address that as well. We have some ADA improvements we want to make at the Coda lot. The parking, some of the spaces are not to current codes. We're going to make those adjustments. Continue with the installation of our security cameras in our parking structures. And then the last project we're going to be looking at doing is conceptual design for a restroom over at Lot 10. At Lot 10, the restroom that currently is over there that's available to the public was built when the lot was first constructed. That restroom was initially intended to be for staff only, but when the city started the downtown restroom program, we opened it up to the general public. And we're having some problems there with excessive use of water. It was the latest thing that we've seen happen there. Plus, some people will just lock themselves in there for extended periods of time and doing things that probably aren't appropriate. So we're looking at the possibility of doing a restroom similar to what we did over by Marshall's, by 914 State Street. But we only have money in the budget for conceptual. We have not... because we don't know how much it's going to cost. We estimate it might be $500,000, but that's unfunded, and that would be in a future year before we would actually move forward with a project there. And that's the end of the Transportation Division.
Any other questions on this? Nope. Okay, thank you.
And Joshua Hagmark
think
is
we've
here
seen
to
him a
present
couple of times
the
this
budget
year.
for the Water Resources Division.
Great. Thank you.
Madam
Of restrooms, it's a good segue into the wastewater.
Segue. Go ahead.
Missed the cue. Madam Mayor, council members, I tried with my presentation today, since we talk so frequently about water and wastewater issues, to try and abbreviate what's going on. But of course, if you have questions and would like to dive into details, I'm more than happy to discuss that, recognizing that the water and wastewater budgets this year make up a good chunk of Public Works' overall budget. So we're going to start with wastewater. Wastewater is comprised of 3 programs: the laboratory. There's Galen there, one of our laboratory analysts, wastewater collections, and wastewater treatment. Starting off with revenues, one of the interesting things you'll see with this is the impacts of the drought actually on our wastewater revenues. We had a 5.5% increase in revenues last year. Rates. And what that did to our revenues is basically kept them flat. You'll notice that the FY14 actuals and FY15 projected are basically on par with one another. So we are again pursuing a 5.5% increase this year. It's part of a 10-year-long rate study that was done for our rates to make sure that we had adequate revenue to match our capital expenditures. So this year we are actually hoping to make some headway as long as our impacts from the drought do not continue to eat away at our revenue source associated with this. We have deferred capital to kind of make this happen and to reflect the drought, but we'll continue to come back to the council, obviously, if there's any significant changes to these projections. The other point I wanted to highlight in here was the Mission Canyon. We are 1 day short of being able to have given you more detail on this, but at council tomorrow, we will be discussing basically a new JPA related to the maintenance and treatment of Mission Canyon sewage. The county is taking on the role of maintenance of the 11 miles of sewer mains in the county, and the city will now be performing conveyance and treatment only. Basically, that will reflect about a $250,000 revenue decrease. However, that also frees up those staff to focus on our system. So we see that as a neutral there. And then we also, with the intergovernmental, which is basically our SRF loans, we're reflecting the influx of approximately $25 million associated with this secondary aeration basin rehab project. Salaries and benefits, we'll notice that it's pretty status quo. You'll notice under special projects, we are finishing up our work upgrades to the SCADA system, and so that budget will be returning to basically normal funding. And then under capital, you'll notice rehabilitation of the secondary. That's the influx of money there, recognizing a huge increase this year related to that loan. To talk in more detail here, there is $30 million budgeted for wastewater capital this next year. That reflects $4.1 million for routine collection and treatment capital, which includes highlights such as ongoing sewer main pipe repair and replacement and pump station rehabilitation, along with minor treatment plant projects. The bulk of that being the almost $26 million associated with the secondary aeration basin. And just for the council's knowledge, if you haven't been out for a tour, we'd welcome one, but this right here is the secondary aeration basin that we will be upgrading. And it will take several years to complete that project, but it is a major part of the wastewater treatment process, and so staff will be very busy managing that project on site.
What's the status of the recycled water? Is it still July that we're planning to tertiary?
Well, there's actually been some new information on that, and engineering staff will be coming back to you. We've had a problem with the membranes that were spec'd for that project, and so they'll be bringing back an update the first part of June and a presentation to go with that. We're hopeful we can still keep that target of July, but they're currently wrestling with a pretty significant problem.
Okay, so we'll stay tuned for that.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Wastewater collections. There are 17 staff allocated to this program. The core function of this group remains to be the safe and effective operations of the city's 257 miles of sewer mains. Our sanitary overflow target this calendar year is to have no more than 10 spills. We have 6 SSO, sanitary sewer overflow events this calendar year. As we reported on May 12th, there are a number of additional things the city is doing to try and reduce our overall spills. However, we do remain below the average for systems in California of similar age. As you can imagine, this is frustrating not only for myself but the staff. I believe we've implemented a program that is and will be successful. It's just going to take some time to kind of turn that corner, and we appreciate the council's confidence in that, and we will continue to bring back stuff if we see other ideas for improving that. But we've certainly implemented a lot over the last few years. Staff works hard to maintain the sewer system and takes a lot of pride in work they do. It's unfortunate that we've had the spills, but they do reflect the challenges of improving the performance of an aging sewer system. There are 27 staff assigned to this program. The core function of this group is to see that all of the community's wastewater is treated and disposed of in a manner consistent with state and federal regulations. This group is our first defense to protect the environment from the community's wastewater. They take great pride in the operation of the plant, and everyone who has had the fortune to get a tour has experienced that pride. In 2015, El Estero was selected as Regional Plant of the Year by the California Water Environment Association. and that was based on the good operational performance and strong commitment to capital improvements. As you may all be aware, there have been some significant improvements over the last few years at the 34-year-old plant, and there still is much work to be done. The staff at the plant are dedicated, intelligent, creative, and a pleasure to work with. Many times, large projects require the staff to come up with ingenious workarounds to keep the plant operating while key components are replaced or rebuilt. The plant never rests, and it never takes a break from protecting the environment from wastewater. There are 7 staff assigned to the laboratory program. The core function of this group is to provide high-quality water and wastewater sampling analysis. Laboratory staff perform technical work for both wastewater and water permits and regulatory needs. Laboratory staff perform city industrial waste program management functions as well for high-strength waste discharges, making sure that we capture and are capturing the cost of treating this waste. Laboratory staff provide ad hoc technical support to other city departments, including Creeks and the Waterfront Department. As I'd mentioned, a 10-year rate study was completed in 2014, and following with that rate study, the 5.5% increase that is proposed for the FY16. This chart summarizes what those impacts to our ratepayers will do in comparison to other agencies. The average user will see a the maximum charge to our residential customer will be $2.37 per month for FY16. And as you can see, with comparison to our neighboring agency, the city has very competitive wastewater rates. In FY15, we will be able to absorb the revenue shortfall due to the drought, but for FY16, we did make accommodations for continued conservation at the same level. However, if conservation increases significantly, this will impact wastewater revenues. We will be tracking this closely and reporting significant changes back. Just for a little back history on this, wastewater rates top out at water usage of 10 HCF, so they are tied to our water usage. And so if a customer, we have our average customer we used to talk about that used 12 HCF, so for them they would pay basically this maximum rate that we have here. And as we see more conservation occurring, we're seeing more of our customers dropping below that 10 HCF cap, and so that's what we're seeing the decrease in revenues into our wastewater fund. The challenge here is about 80% of the costs of operating our wastewater system are fixed, and so that it becomes a challenge when we see those costs dropping off. So within the water fund program, basically we have 5 sections, starting with the Cater Water Treatment Plant. Moving over to the right, we see our distribution staff and the maintenance of our distribution system. In the center, we have Gibraltar Dam and its operations. Bottom left-hand corner, the water supply management. Gibraltar, that's a big meadow in Gibraltar that didn't exist 5 years ago. And, of course, meter reading. So water capital this year, we broke it out. We do have a drought fund that I'm going to be talking about separately from the water fund. But basically the bulk of the $6.9 million that's been set aside for water capital, $1 million is for meter replacement, about $500,000 for ongoing meter replacement, which we're doing with a combination of city staff and hourly staff that we've brought on just for this effort. Our plan is to replace all the city meters within 5 years, and this is our just starting in our second year. We also have set aside a budget for a small potential pilot project for AMI should the benefits of that come back and council be interested in moving forward. Water main replacement, we funded at $4.7 million. However, we're not planning on doing any mass main replacement. We will be taking care of critical needs, such as Yananali right now. You probably saw that water main. We were having numerous issues with that, and so we just jumped in and we're getting that replaced. We'll also probably be doing something up on APS that we've had some issues with. But at this point, no large main program replacement due to the water losses associated with that. Water Resources Management, there are 3 staff allocated to this program. The staff for this include the Water System Manager, an Admin Assistant, and me. The city's Water Resources Management program covers a broad spectrum depicted on this picture. And given the amount of discussions we've had over the last month, I'll spare you the details of all the different aspects of that. There are 2 staff assigned to the Gibraltar Reservoir. Despite the reservoir being nearly empty, there is plenty of work to be done to keep this 100-year-old asset operational and ready for service. Staff will be conducting the annual Department of Safety of Dam inspection, along with general maintenance to keep the roads and facility in good working order and the brush cleared for fire protection. Another critical city asset that is in operation 24/7 to ensure the community and our partners of CARP and Montecito have reliable, safe, and affordable water. The proposed budget includes 1 FTE to take on the added workload as a result of the new processes that were added during the recently completed Cater Advanced Treatment Project, also known as Ozone. This will bring the total staffing to 14 assigned to this program. Along with the dwindling water supply, so goes the quality of our surface water. The staff at Cater have been working hard to treat the increasingly challenging surface water. This year's budget does include additional funding to treat more challenging water. As Lake Cachuma draws down, the water quality will become more difficult to treat. The recent investment in upgrades at Cater will serve us well to treat very difficult water conditions at an added cost. This is not the case for many treatment plants statewide. So despite the commitment and the cost to do it, I feel comfortable going into it saying that we can take on this more difficult water, and I can't say the same for most of our neighbors. We are also planning for a decrease in water production this year from our partners, CARP and Montecito. This means a larger percentage of the fixed operational costs will fall to the city based on our current JPA. This program has just shy of 1 staff assigned to it. As the council knows from my monthly updates, the groundwater production and treatment have been very challenging. Both distribution and treatment staff have been working together to maximize production and keep this local water supply operating. This will continue to be a focus for FY16. This is the largest program. There are 35 staff assigned to this program. Note this is kind of a busy slide we have here. We have basically a main replacement going on the far left slide, one of our pump stations here. We have a main repair going on and general maintenance of our pressure reducing valve, very large one there. The core function of this team is to maintain and operate the water distribution system, which includes 300 miles of water main, 27,000 service connections, 13 reservoirs, 7 pump stations, 9 wells, and 17 pressure zones. Despite planning to deliver less water this coming year, management and maintenance of the distribution system remains high. Staff will be focused on water quality issues as raw water supplies degrade, water temperatures rise, and water turnover in the system is anticipated to be lower than usual. All of these factors make the potential water quality challenges high this coming year. We are planning to continue to curtail our annual flushing and reservoir cleaning this year to reduce water losses. However, we will still remain in compliance with state and federal regulations on this matter. We will, as I said, suspend the typical main replacement, but we will be doing work on critical locations as necessary. There are 6 staff assigned to the meter reading program. Accurate metering is an important part of conservation and our relationship with the community. The staff reads approximately 27,000 meters every month. The water recycled program, there are 5 staff assigned to this program. Planning for the new recycled water plant to come online this summer. Val Verde Ware continues to play a critical role in limiting the potable water needed in the system. The proposed budget for the water supply group, the proposed budget includes 1 new position this year, bringing this program up to 7 staff assigned to this program. The new staff member is a water supply manager that we are reestablishing. This position will be leading the effort with the Groundwater Sustainability Agency. The recent passage of the Groundwater Sustainability Act opens a path forward to gain better control over our local groundwater supplies. As part of this new position, the group will undergo a reorg to better take on this new task. The biggest challenge in this program remains the extra work due to the drought. It continues to be a very busy group. The Water Conservation is continuing to broaden their program, increasing public outreach, and water conservation members. Rebates have been so popular, we've increased our funding for FY16 to $200,000, budgeted between drought and regular operating. As part of the water supply group, we have the drought fund. There are 3 full-time temporary staff to address the drought-related workload. And to kind of break down that $9.6 million, $4 million is for groundwater development. Approximately $4 million was for water purchases and conveyance, and $1.6 million accounts for the staffing, rebates, money spent for desal and drought advertising, along with the emergency pump project. So this year's projected revenues or proposed revenues of $41.8 million, a significant increase from FY15, and a significant portion of this was to take on certainly the added costs of desal. I do have a slide that I'll be going into more details because I want to talk about this, but when we were discussing the adopted rates, we were optimistic that if we received an SRF loan, we would be able to drop the rates as a result of the increased conservation target. We are no longer able to reduce the FY16 rates at this point. I do have another slide coming up that I'll go into more detail on this. The other point that I wanted to point out here was the JPA reimbursement. That's our projected revenue drop because there's basically we're treating less water for Montecito and Carpinteria. So the budget, salaries and benefits, this includes the 2 new positions, one at Cater and one in the water supply group. And we do have an expenditure in here recognized for the loan of $47 million. Again, that's a placeholder at this point. That does not reflect any new information we have. It's just a placeholder. Cost of desal. One of the things that has changed is the cost of the desal project. We're not anticipating now the loan repayment to start until FY18, and so I'll be discussing that a little bit further along. Adopted water rates for the 5/8 meter. One of the things I want to note is we've gotten away from, we used to talk about low, average, and high, and we now talk about moderate because this is no longer our average. But I think it's important to kind of show the spectrum of water usage. As was adopted, the low users would see about a $13 increase. Moderate users would see close to a $30 increase, and high users would see about a $120 increase. These would take effect starting July 1st. So here's where these rates leave us. Even with the substantial increases that we're looking at, the city will have the lowest water cost to our low users, someone using 400 HCF a month or less. For our average users, the city will have the lowest costs for water usage as well. These are based on what we've seen from other agencies looking to increase. These are rates that will go into effect for them on July 1st. And for our large users, the city will have the highest costs for water usage.
Mr. White.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. That's a great slide. What about meter charges? Do you have a slide on that too?
I do not. Those would remain, I believe I have, I didn't break out the meter charges separately.
Okay. Can we get that sometime, and also the comparison with other
on the
districts?
Meter charge?
Yeah, thank you.
So just to wrap up on the rates, when we came to council and we talked about the FY16 rates that were adopted, there were some assumptions that were built into those. One of those was a 20% conservation, an assumption that the desal loan would be a 6% interest for 10 years, and the loan repayments would begin immediately. We also had anticipated that we would have to be making a matching contribution. We thought we'd have to put 20% down on that loan. So our current understanding, we have moved to a higher conservation target of 25%, an estimated revenue loss with that of $5 million. The desal loan right now, we're feeling very confident about the 1.6% interest for 20 years, just a matter of when that loan comes through. And repayment of the SRF loan would not start until FY18. With this loan, we will not have to put down 20%. which also takes that off. So balancing this, right now we have Raftellus going through it, but just preliminarily looking at this, we will not have the ability this year to lower rates as we had hoped. But we are looking at how these rates will impact FY17 and so on. So that's what we hope to come back to you in June when we bring back the desal discussion for a full discussion. We plan to bring back the results of Raftellus's investigation into this. We are planning for contingency. Obviously, if the community exceeds 25%, there's some good parts to that, and that's the water saved, but there's also the financial impacts of that. So one of the things that we're already thinking ahead is not planned into the current budget are some grants related to the emergency pump project and the recycled water project. Recycled water project, we got about $1 million grant there, and then total through COMB and the emergency pump project, we anticipate about another $1 million. So there's about $2 million in revenue we hope to come in. And then we also have the ability with our loan to submit for costs that we've already spent on the desal projects this last year, which is about $2 million. So we could seek immediately, once the loan comes through, reimbursement of that money. And so that is revenue not shown in the budget that could be used to offset conservation higher than 25%. And so that completes my presentation. If there's any questions.
Great. Thank you. Any questions? Mr. White.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I guess we'll be hearing more about this on the reclaim delay. Is that a contractor responsibility issue? I know that there's a performance enticement there, and maybe you could describe that a little bit of whether
Madam Mayor,
that would work.
Councilmember White, yes, at this point, we believe there's an errors and omissions issue related to the design engineer. At this point, they are fully engaged in trying to resolve the matter. Like I said, we hope to bring back more information, but at this point, it appears to lie on the designer, which kind of further complicates this matter. However, what we're doing is we're looking at everything. Everything's on the table related to that scope of work and seeing that we can hold that July date. We've been taking a look at the contract and looking at removing elements that are absolutely not critical to bringing that water supply back online. And there are, as you make note, there are some very stiff penalties for not meeting the contract date. I don't remember what they are offhand, but they're several $1,000s a day. So there's a lot of motivation for the contractor to meet that deadline.
Any other questions? No more public comment, speaker slips. Okay, so that concludes this budget work session. Thank you very much.